This is Amazing Histories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Over to Gary.
I saw a film about Winston Churchill the other day. Gary Oldman in a fat suit, smoking a lot of cigars and yelling at people. It implied he was a bit of an oddball duffer who saved Britain from the Nazis.
Actually, I saw him when he was alive, you know.
You're that old?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm practically an historical relic. In fact, my mother said I would be able to tell my grandchildren that I'd seen him. That's Churchill. She was a fan of Churchill. She imagined having to fight in the streets and on the beaches, and even contemplated dyeing her hair blonde just in case the Nazis came and thought she was Jewish, which perhaps shows that there was a moment when the UK was right on the brink of disaster, and people were pretty scared.
And Churchill saved them, not the Russians or the Americans?
Essentially, nope. Churchill single-handedly stopped the UK surrendering to Hitler.
Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the sea and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
If it wasn't for him, instead of John Winston Lennon strumming a guitar in Hamburg singing, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah," the 60s would have been John Adolf Lennon singing,
Come on, one man couldn't do that. Especially not a man who was notoriously drunk all the time and had servants who dressed him.
Yeah, well, did you see how he dressed?
Obviously his dresses weren't very good at it, but he had a huge staff at his house who read papers for him and typed up all his speeches. I saw the film, and didn't he have the RAF and a British Navy and an entire empire?
Well, point taken, but we're here in Singapore, and when the Japanese invaded Malaya, the British were caught by surprise, and their only tactic was to run for Fortress Singapore. Churchill told the British forces here to fight to the death. That was his order.
They didn't, though.
Yeah, well, their commander didn't even give the standard British last-ditch order of every man for himself. He thought it futile, but afterwards we learnt that the Japanese were down to their last few rounds of ammunition and terrified that they had lost the momentum. Now, imagine if one man had had the energy and sheer charisma to rally the troops. Now, Singapore might have been saved.
It takes more than one man to do that.
Yeah, well, might I suggest that Lee Kuan Yew demonstrates the power and influence that one man can have?
Okay, so he was the one guy who rallied the British people, but they still voted him out at the end of the war. Instead of a knighthood, he got, according to him, the Order of the Boot.
Yeah, well, I think any of my parents' generation, whatever side of the political spectrum, would have happily seen Churchill made a lord and given a lifetime supply of whiskey and cigars, and probably thought it disgusting that he had to wait so long to be knighted. But they thought him too old-fashioned to be PM. But he was, for a long time, the only real voice of opposition to Hitler, and there was a real sense that he embodied Britishness. His own personal history somehow followed the fortunes of Britain. He didn't get knighted until 1953, which I think tells you more about the British upper classes than it does about the general public.
I understand many of the royals supported Hitler. The abdicated king, Edward VII, was a friend of Goebbels.
Yes, well, the German sympathies went deep among the aristocracy, and even Prince Philip's family were a hotbed of Nazis. And there were many in the government when the French were surrendering and the British forces were trapped in Dunkirk, who wanted to offer Franco Gibraltar and Mussolini Malta and Germany the old colonies of Southwest Africa and Tanganyika in exchange for peace and possibly an alliance with Hitler against Stalin.
The British had a long history of conflict with Russia, and I assume they were pretty horrified at Stalin's genocidal policies. So why didn't they join Hitler?
Crawling up the ranks of the security services and among other key areas of British society were communists, or at least fellow travellers, as they used to call people with a socialist bent. And there were more communist sympathisers in the Labour movement than supporters of Hitler, and Churchill got a lot of support for a government of national unity from the Labour Party.
What? Are you saying that Churchill was a communist? No wonder the empire collapsed.
Well, the beauty of Churchill was that he was incorruptible, and most certainly on the side of the empire, and capitalism, of course, and strangely democracy, at least for Britain, if not for the rest of the empire, who were what he considered primitive people in need of guidance.
He called Indians a beastly people with a beastly religion. And he said that the objections of the Indian office to the use of gas against natives are unreasonable. And in 1943, 4 million Bengalis starved to death, and Churchill ordered diversion of food to British soldiers. He blamed the famine of the Indians breeding like rabbits. His attitude doesn't sound very different than Hitler's. Does that make him good or bad?
It certainly makes sense of Britain's ambiguous attitudes towards Churchill, though perhaps not so much sense of American adulation, especially given the suspicion that Churchill withheld warnings of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in the hope that it would bring them into the war.
But he was incorruptible?
Completely, not a hint of corruption.
He can't be that squeaky clean, not with his attitude. His pants came off on a regular basis, didn't they? Or was he like the Empire? Had he taken too many toxins to be able to get it up anymore?
Well, I assume he got it up sometime in his life, but scandalous behavior seems unlikely.
Oh, come on. He would roam about naked and once flashed Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, come on, he had his kinks. He was accused of being gay at Sandhurst, and when one of his ministers was caught on Hampstead Heath sodomizing a guardsman in freezing temperatures, apparently Churchill said it made him feel proud to be British. Is that cigar he always had in his mouth a substitute for other desires?
But it is true that he was not a ladies' man, and there seems to have been only one woman in his life, Clementine. He called her Pussy.
Now that must mean something.
Yeah, and she called him Pig.
I hate to think what they got up to.
Once the children had been born, nothing much, it seems. She busied herself with long holidays, notably one in Bali with an art dealer friend, if you understand what I mean. And Churchill was just too busy running England either from within the government or from the backbenches, and perhaps he was just not that inclined.
So he was too busy ordering terror bombing of Germany for funny business?
Well, in the days of the internet, he'd no doubt be explaining away some very dubious Instagrams, but at the time, his rumoured eccentricities made many, as he might say, proud to be British. Okay,
so he wasn't exactly a Weinstein, but he must have taken a few backhanders now and then?
Well, once again, whatever he took was out in the open. He was hardworking and was one of the highest paid journalists ever, even in his 20s when he was a war reporter covering the Boer War.
But he reputedly drank a bottle of champagne a day, continually smoked 50-pound cigars,
That's a bad thing.
had enormous dinners, entertaining many people, and never traveled by public transport. Didn't his wife fear they'd be bankrupt because of his extravagance? And wasn't one of his extravagances having very expensive silk underwear? I quote his wife, "Underwear made of very finely woven silk from the Army and Navy stores and cost the eyes out of his head." He must have been on a take.
Yeah, pink underwear. Silk pink underwear, yeah. Well, he lived right on the cusp of his earnings. but he was earning them, and he didn't come from a poor background. His father was Lord Randolph Churchill, and his mother was an American heiress with her own money. He was but a few heartbeats away from inheriting Marlborough Palace, so his money problems were of a slightly different nature to yours or mine.
I still don't get his reputation, though, either the bad or the good. There must have been some way of judging it.
Well, he said history would be kind to him because he would write it himself. And he got the Nobel Prize for Literature, which perhaps indicates that his histories have far more literary flair than hardcore analysis.
Was he that good?
Well, he was of his era, but quite frankly, he was that good. He is very readable. His books about his early life, it's a boy's own adventure of skirmishes on the northwest frontier, the last great cavalry charge, and a daring escape from a Boer prison camp.
It was not like the Great War. Nobody expected to be killed. Here and there in every regiment or battalion, half a dozen, a score, at the worst 30 or 40 would pay the forfeit. But to the great mass of those who took part in the little wars of Britain in those vanished light-hearted days, this was only a sporting element in a splendid game.
I assume it was all exaggerated stuff.
Yeah, well, he was trying to get famous so he could get into Parliament, but, well, imagine you're in a bar with the man and he's telling you the story of the Battle of Omdurman, about how he was there and how the bullets were flying and how many whizzed past him and how many horses were shot out from under him.
We've met these men before, haven't we?
That's right. He's a typical great gamer. He wanted to make his mark and, well, the Empire provided ample opportunity. You go out into the world, you, as a superior Englishman, bamboozle, outwit and do a deal with some native that you spin in your reports back to the newspapers and the publishers, and it all turns into money and power, either back in the UK or some colonial establishment.
They're vaguely absurd and terrifying.
Yes, and ruled a quarter of the world. But I think Churchill could be deemed one of the last of the breed. After him...
The British got silly?
Silly as they come.
This has been Amazing Histories. Please subscribe below.
Subscribe, like, subscribe.